Okay, that's William Lowe. That's my Wilhelm Lowe. That's my mother's father. And I believe he was a bricklayer by trade.
Right.
And this is my mother's mother, Emma Hoyerman Lowe. And this is my mother's sister. I hear she liked to dress nice. I never met her, but she's the one that died shortly before we got there. And these are two of my mother's brothers, Otto and Willie. Willie is really the oldest one. Right next to my mother. My mother was the oldest in the family. And I don't know where Otto is in line. You know, they took nice pictures in those days and how well they lasted, and now pictures don't last that well. That's my grandparents again. This is Otto. This is Gustav, another brother of my mother's, the one with the X on it. And this is Selma in her older years. There's Wilhelm and Selma again, and her. She just had one son. Her married name was Saul. And these are some more pictures of Mom's relatives. They're pretty small.
Do you know any stories about any of them?
I never met any of them. Willie's wife, I met her. She and my mother were very close. And we took our mother to Germany when in 92. Mom was 91 then. And that's the last time I saw her. She died a few years after that. That's her in the middle there. And that's an aunt and uncle of Grandma's. They were very close too. This is Mom's sister, Selma. This is another picture of Mom's brother, Willie, the oldest one. I imagine his name was Wilhelm, but she always called him Willie.
Did you ever hear any stories about him?
No, except that he worked for a farmer when he had to leave home when his dad got married the second time, and she didn't accept the children. They were all kind of scattered, but he made out all right. That's Willie and his wife Martha. Must be their wedding picture. And this is Mom's brother's Willie's two daughters. This is one of the daughters, and this is her. I believe she was the oldest. This is the younger. She lives near Berlin. We call each other quite often and write, and she too. I visited both their homes, and she has been here, but she's afraid of rattlesnakes and Indians, so she refuses to come, but her husband has been here. These pictures you probably won't be so interested in. That's the girls' wedding, Ingeborg, and that's their families. The cemeteries in Germany, they all have to be cremated now because nobody can afford to have a plot big enough for a grave, and the whole family is buried in just a little area. Land is getting so expensive. Now cremation is getting to be quite popular here too. That's her mom and dad's wedding picture, with a borrowed wedding dress and a borrowed veil. And my mother was 21 and my dad was 30. So these pictures are quite small. They're of us kids when we were small, this out in the farm after a bad blizzard. My goodness, we used to have blizzards so the windows were covered with snow. Here's my dad when he first came to America. He was working for the Isaac family, and these three kids are Isaac kids. He's wearing his army coat. I recognize that. This is an uncle of my dad's. That was my dad's mother's brother. He also was in America. He lived over at Washburn. And we still have relatives, some of his offspring. Here's my Uncle Edward. This was my dad's sister Caroline. She was 14 when Dad tried to bring him over here, and it never worked out. She had kind of a sad, hard life. She had 4 boys, and the oldest one, the kids were playing on someplace, and they found a hand grenade. They didn't know what it was. They were tossing it around, and a boy tossed it to her son. I think he was about 8, and it exploded and killed him. Another one died of an illness. And then the 2 surviving sons is one we visited when we went to Russia in '92. And here's Henry Lindemann, the uncle that we chipped together, bought his ticket and brought him over, my dad's brother from Germany. And then he died later on. He had some bad wounds on his legs from shrapnel. And this is my dad's mother. Like I say, I never had a picture of his dad. And this picture from Russia was given to us when we visited in Russia in '92. So my dad never even saw that picture. And this is my dad with a friend by the name of, I believe it's Fulmer. He came from the same village as Dad did in Russia. They were good friends all their lives. They lived over across the river somewhere at Mercer or somewhere over there. And here's my favorite picture of Bill and Leona. Here's my sister Leona when she graduated from high school. And Mom and Dad again. My dad was German, but he could have sure passed for a Russian. Looks like Dr. Zhivago. There's us 4 kids again. Here's my high school picture. And that one you saw before. Was taken in 1928 because I was born in '28 in February, and evidently that was the first summer in '28. That's Mom and Dad. Then when we taught school, we had, I had a '36 Ford I drove, and I think my sister's was, or '46 Ford, I take that back. My sister had a black Ford coupe. My oldest brother always fixed up cars for us and kept them going, and we drove to school with our cars, and that's about it.
All right. Can you draw your farm for us?
Well, I'll try. I haven't been there for a long time, but let's see. We have a road coming in from the north part of the property. And my dad was a great tree planter. He loved trees, like it was in Ukraine where he came from. So there was a long row of ponderosa pine along the driveway here when you drive in from the north. And over here was what we called a pig fence. We used to have a lot of hogs, partly for home use and for a cash crop. And then the pig house, we called it the pig house, it was here. And this was their whole yard here to roam around in. And then over here was the granary, where the grain was stored. Should I write granary on here?
If you want.
Let's see, it's spelled granary with an A-I or just a E?
I don't remember.
They say granary. And then over here was the windmill. We had a tall windmill. It was about 30 feet high. And then with a pipe over to the stock tank where the stock would come for water. And over here was the barn. And then it had a corral back here. Now that's going to look like, anyway, it was like a fence like. And there was a fence around here too. Came from here about over to here with the gate right here, and there was a gate here, I believe. And then what we called the car shed was here. That's where Dad's shop was, and the forge was in there where he used to do his forge work, like sharpening plowshares and so on. We called it the car shed, so we didn't call it a garage. And then this was all yard here. And then this over here was more trees and the garden. Mom always had a big garden, and she did a lot of canning. We bought very little at the store, sugar and coffee and things like that. And then here was what we called the old house. It was a 2-room house where we 4 kids grew up. And it had been moved out from Golden Valley. It had been a bank at one time. And Dad built a lean-to on the back. And let's see, the fence came down this way. It was changed later on too. There were changes made. That was the old house. And then what we call the new house was over here. We got that in about, let's see, I was 14 years old. Add that to 28 makes what? 52? No. Anyway, what?
42?
42, that sounds more like it. That was a parsonage that Dad bought when the church closed northeast of our place about 3 miles. Dad bought that parsonage for $500 and had it moved down here. Dug a new basement with horses and a scraper and lined it with sandstone on one side anyway. And then he built a porch on to the east side. Mom always wanted a sun porch, but it was enclosed with windows. And on the south side he built a kitchen and a future bathroom. It never became a bathroom while I was home, but now it was a bathroom in later years. And it had 2 bedrooms upstairs, one for the boys and one for we 2 girls. And this was more trees back here and garden. And then a big garage was built here when we were still living out there. And then the road going south to that we came in on was about here. Came up into the yard. And then Dad had bought an old schoolhouse. As the country schools closed, they started selling the schoolhouses. And oh, we had an outhouse too. That was over about here. That was the outhouse, if you know what that is. The Beck house. And this was an old schoolhouse. And then the pastures were over this way. The cropland was north. And there was some cropland here. And south was a pasture and more cropland down here. And that's about what was there when I lived there.
What did you use the schoolhouse for?
Well, it was for storage. Stored things in it. Some people made grain bins out of it. Some people cut a big door on one side and made a garage out of it. Ours, I guess we just used it for storage mostly.
All right. And where did you get your water from for the house?
From the well here, from the pump. If the wind didn't blow, we had to pump it by hand. If the wind blew, we had water for the cattle. Later years, Dad put a pump jack on it with a stationary gasoline engine to pump water, because you couldn't always depend on the wind not blowing. Now it blows every day.
Did you have electricity out of this house?
We got electricity in 1950. I remember that. It was the last year I was home before I got married, and we got electricity that year in August, I believe. Before that, my brother Bill, he was kind of a jack of all trades. When we lived in the old house, he hooked up a wind charger on the roof of the house, and we had a bare light bulb in the kitchen. And when the wind blew hard, the light got real bright, and when the wind went down, the light got kind of dim. But my mother was so proud of what her 14-year-old son Bill had done. He had a knack for mechanical things.
How did having electricity change your life?
Oh, first thing we got was a refrigerator. My dad liked cold water, drinking water. And a radio. We had a battery radio before that with big pack batteries. And when the batteries got low, you had to put your ear right up to the radio to hear it. So a radio was one of the first things my dad bought. Because, let's see, the war was over then, but in the battery radio, whenever news came on, we kids would run out in the yard and we'd say, "Dad, news, news," and he'd run in the house and have his ear up to the radio. And we liked to listen to Jack Armstrong. We'd run home from school and listen to Jack Armstrong and Fibber McGee and Molly in the evening, and there were some other programs that were so good that we listened to on the radio. Gangbusters on Saturday night.
Can you tell me what that was about?
Oh, it was sort of crime stories like they have on TV all the time now. You know, somebody chasing the bad guys. Gangbusters, it was called.
All right. Can you describe the roads going into your farm?
Well, there were gravel roads. Of course, the one leading out to the main road was over here. That was graveled. Now it's paved. After we left the farm many years, it was paved now. But these were just dirt trails. If it rained like it is now, you know, you had to probably make a new trail out on the prairie so you wouldn't get stuck in that or mess up the road too bad. This was all dirt roads going out to the main road.
How far were you from the nearest town?
Let's see, north of Golden Valley, about 5 miles.
Did you go into town often?
Every Saturday night, unless we needed something during the week, or we had to take cream to town to get it on the train, to ship it to Mandan, to the creamery. We sold our eggs in town on Saturday night, and if we had enough cream on Saturday night, we'd take that to town. There was a cream buyer in town, and then we'd get the check right away, and that bought the groceries. And our dime allowance that we got. A whole dime.
All right. Is there anything else you can share with us about this farm where you grew up?
Oh, I've got many memories. I knew every square inch of that farm. We used to have to... Oh, I forgot the chicken house. Ooh. Is it too late? Put the chicken house in there? Let's see. Goodness, we always had chickens and pigeons. We had lots of pigeons. This had kind of a loft up on top, and that's where the pigeons were. And the chickens were in here. And And we had ducks, a lot of ducks too. My mom raised, and turkeys. She raised a lot of turkeys. That was, in the fall, they would butcher the turkeys, and they had to be, you couldn't tear the skin on them. You had to leave the heads on, and I guess they checked their health that way. You couldn't take the insides out. You just picked them clean and packed them just so in boxes, and we had to take them down to the train, which got to town about 6:30 in the morning, so they could go to Mandan the same day, and they were shipped that way. And that usually bought school clothes and shoes for school. And if the coyotes got them all, tough luck, we had to find the money somewhere else. And pigeons, Mom used to butcher a bunch on Saturday because people in town would order them for 5 cents a piece. And we kids got to take them to town, all butchered and cleaned and ready to cook, and that we got that spending money then. That was good eating. Mom used to fix them on Sunday dinner. That was good.
How did she fix them?
Well, she would put them in a big roaster, and I suppose it took about 20 of them to feed the family. And the giblets, she would make giblet gravy. That was very good, and she just roasted them in the oven, cut them in half and roasted them in the oven, and then she poured cream over it. She cooked everything with cream because we had lots of it. And they were delicious.
Right. Can you share with me some of the chores you had to do growing up?
Yes, about 5 o'clock, it was milking time. Somebody had to go after the cows.
And where would they be?
Well, we usually climbed up the windmill tower and looked around to see where they were, so we wouldn't have to make a trip that way and they were over that way, because it's hilly out there. So we climbed up the windmill and looked to see where the cows were, and sometimes we had to walk 1.5 miles to bring them home. And then the cows would drink water, and we'd put them in the barn. They all knew where their place was, and we'd give them some ground feed, and then we would milk, sometimes usually 15, sometimes 17, 18 cows, all by hand. We didn't have milking machines in those days because we didn't have electricity. And it was usually Mom and the girls. The boys helped sometimes. My younger brother did anyway. And in the morning that had to be done before we went to school. Had to milk those cows. And then the milk was brought in, and what we took for our own use, and then the rest was separated. Cream from the milk in a hand-cranked separator. And the cream we would sell as a cash crop, and the milk we would usually feed that to the calves or the pigs. And sometimes the chickens got some too. Never went to waste anyway. And then we had to feed the chickens, gather the eggs, make sure they had water and feed. On nice days, we would open the door and let them out. Bad days, they had to stay in. And the pigs had to be fed. My dad usually did that. And he had bins on each side of that pig house. One had oats in it and one had spelts in it. And he would feed them some of that. Spelts. S-P-E-L-T-Z. They don't raise it much anymore, but it was good feed. Spelts. And let's see, what else did we have to do? Oh, in the barn, the cows my dad usually fed the cows. They got their feed when we milked, and then they got hay during the day. In the summertime, they were turned back out to pasture. And this went on every day, twice a day. Saturday and Sundays too. No weekends off. And my mom took care of the garden pretty much and the house, and she did anything that had to be done on a farm. She was able to do it, except she didn't like to work with machinery much because she wasn't used to it. And sometimes, and she raised a lot of baby chicks. I think that was one thing we kept over in the old schoolhouse when they were first hatched out or when we first got them from a hatchery. She used to have several hundred of them, and we had a brooder in there, or lights, you know, to keep them warm when it was cool, and like in weather like this. And she took care of them. And
Were there any chores that you particularly liked doing?
not really. My sister liked to milk cows. I think she she liked to do that really well. I liked the chickens and the piggies, I guess. When we had baby pigs, they were cute. Um, I was more the one that had to stay in the house and cook sometimes and do dishes, and because my mom liked to work outside too, and so did my sister. So they helped out. I had to help out in the field sometimes too. The boys did too.
Was there one chore that you disliked more than all the rest?
I didn't really care about the milking part.
Were your chores very different between summer and winter?
Um, yeah, in the wintertime, everything was kind of kept inside, like the chickens, the milk cows, and they'd overnight sometimes, and they would lay down in the mess, you know. In the morning, you'd have to kind of clean them up a little bit before you could milk them, and um, it was kind of more messy, like, I guess.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to tell us about chores when you were growing up?
Well, they had to be done, like I say, twice a day. And sometimes we gathered the eggs a little more often than twice a day. Maybe you needed some, or a neighbor came over and needed a few, or you went to town and some of the relatives needed some, so, or the chickens would probably eat them sometimes if you didn't pick them often enough. We say pick the eggs, it's really gathering the eggs. Um, I like to work in the garden, the house, and I like to take care of the baby chicks, or it was usually my chore to go after the turkeys late in the afternoon, because they would wander. They would go after grasshoppers, and they never went one way or the other. They always kept going ahead of themselves, and pretty soon they were 2 miles from home. So that was usually my chore, to bring the turkeys home in the evening. And if they were standing in a big circle and squawking, I knew they had a snake in the center someplace. Well, I ran home. I wasn't going to bother no turkeys or snake. They had somebody else go and get them then.
All right. You've talked about how you kind of liked working in the garden. What kinds of things did you grow?
Oh, everything. Um, Lots of peas. My mom used to can up to 50 quarts of peas, and now when you plant peas, you barely get your seed back, it seems like. Oh, I liked, we had peas. We always had carrots, radishes, onions, potatoes, mm, kohlrabi. We always had kohlrabi, and I still love that. Squash, watermelon, pumpkins, corn. Well, corn, we had that out in the field with, usually sweet corn. We planted that out in the field with the corn planter when my dad planted the other corn. And usually the vining crops like melons and citron. We used to raise citron and pumpkins and squash, the vining crops. We had them out in a patch in the field, and they called that a bashtan. I guess that's a Russian word, bashtan. Spell it however you like, I don't know.
Right.
And we used to bring home wagon loads of pumpkin, squash, and citron and watermelon in the fall. Canned muskmelon. Things used to grow so well. I don't know. You just can't raise stuff like that anymore. And sunflowers. Dad used to plant a couple rows of sunflowers out in the cornfield, and we used to cut the heads off in the fall and bring them home in a wagon and then hit the heads with sticks and get the seeds to come out, and we'd eat them in the wintertime. They were called Russian peanuts. Now they have them so full of salt you can't enjoy them anymore. And we used to roast them in the oven. And we raised our own popcorn. Dad would plant a couple rows of popcorn in the cornfield, and we'd bring in the cobs and rub them together and get the kernels off, and that was our popcorn for the winter. So we were pretty self-sufficient.
How did you make popcorn?
Well, my ingenious older brother that could do anything, he made a big popper out of screen wire, and that closed on top and opened it, and we just slide it on the cook stove, on the coal stove. And sometimes we just used a heavy pan with a lid and popped it that way. We didn't have corn poppers. Then Mom would put some good butter on and salt, and we made our own butter.
And how did you do that?
Well, you had to let the cream sour, you know, and you put it in a butter churn. And it had a handle, you turned it, and that had a paddle in it. And it would, you keep turning that, and the paddle would go, and pretty soon it would make butter. And then you pour the buttermilk off, and Mom had a big wooden bowl and a paddle where she would, you know, put cold water on it and keep turning it so all the buttermilk would come out of it and make butter. It was good.
All right. Is there anything else you'd like to share with us about growing up on the farm?
Well, we used to butcher a couple of hogs every fall, and the neighbors would get together and help each other out in butchering, and that was kind of an all-day affair, and they had a big time doing that. There was always a bottle or two of wine, and they kept nipping at it, you know, and they had more fun as the day progressed, but they always got the job done. And they'd scald the pig outside in a big barrel of steaming hot water, and that would make the bristles, and then they'd scrape the bristles off, and then they'd hang it up in the barn on a swivel hook, string them up, and then they'd cut them open and take the intestines out, and they say they used everything. The intestines were turned inside out and scraped that membrane off the inside, and that's what they used for sausage casings. And the stomach and the bladder were also turned inside out and scraped and used to put head cheese in. And the big intestines were for liver sausage. The small ones were for the bratwurst. And like I say, they used everything but the spleen. The liver was used, the kidneys were used, even the brains were used. That was my delicacy for my dad.
And how would he use those?
Well, Mom would put them in a frying pan, kind of chop them up, put onions in, and kind of cook them that way, and they said they were delicious, but I could never get myself to eat the brains. But that was kind of a delicacy. And the kidneys and the liver and the meat from the head, they cut the eyes out, cut the ears out, and trimmed out the ear channel and used the rest of the meat. They boiled the head in a big boiler on the stove, and then what meat it had went into the head cheese. That's where it got its name, head cheese, I guess. And some of the liver went in it, and some of the rind was used in the liver sausage. My mother made good liver sausage. Very good liver sausage. And then the meat that they would grind up, they would put that into the sausage. And they usually put lots of garlic in, salt and pepper. Later years, they put in some of the freeze and pickle, they called it. It's a spice that made it turn red and gave it a good taste. That's not good for you. Nitrates, it's not good for you, but they used it. And some of the sausage my mother would can because we didn't have freezers then. And some hung out in the smokehouse all winter. When company came, you kids run over there and get some sausage. And we'd get a couple of long pieces, and Mom would put them in the frying pan, and that was always a midnight lunch when the company was ready to go home, or a quick supper. And homemade bread with homemade butter. That was delicious. And let's see, that was butchering. And then the pig's feet, they didn't throw them away either. They were cleaned, and they were boiled, and they made what they called the colladettes. It would get like a jelly, thicker. It would set up in a pan. They would put bits of meat in and vinegar and salt and pepper and put it in bread pans, and then they could cut it into nice slices. That was colladettes. That must be a Russian word too. Spell it however you like. K-O-L-A Detz, D-E-T-Z, colladettes. My mother made good colladettes too. And let's see, and that's chickens. Mom would butcher a bunch of chickens every fall and can some of them. We ate a lot of canned chicken and canned pork and canned sausage because we didn't have freezers.
How did you keep food cool?
We would put it in a pail. Some people had an outdoor well, that where they could dip water out of. They would hang a pail into the well. We didn't have one of those wells. We had a very deep well with a windmill on it. So we put our stuff in a pail, like the butter and the milk and the cream, and we would take it down into the basement. That was the coolest place we had. And we had fresh milk every day, so it was no big problem. But to keep the butter and the cream, for the next meal, so that would stay cool, as cool as we. And sometimes when Mom made Jell-O and we were in a hurry, we'd take it out to the stock tank. She'd put it in a jar, and there was always cold water in there, and we would put it in the stock tank. In the summertime, anyway. The wintertime, you just set it out the door, and you got your refrigerator and freezer.
So how did you keep your house cool in the summertime?
Open the windows. We didn't have any air conditioner. Later on, after we got electricity, we got fans, but never had an air conditioner. And in the wintertime, to keep it warm, we had a coal furnace. We shoveled a lot of coal and carried a lot of ashes out. First, when we lived in the old house, we had just a pot-bellied heater in the bedroom and the coal range in the kitchen. And then sometimes in the morning when the fires were out, the water in the water pail was froze solid. Well, maybe not solid, but it had ice on it. So it got pretty cold. First thing in the morning, Mom and Dad built fires in the stoves and got things warmed up, and that's where we took our bath, by the kitchen range, in a tub. Girls first, then the boys.
You shared water?
Same water. Mom would just add another pail of warm water to it, and
Right.
it worked.
How often did you take baths?
Every Saturday night, whether we needed it or not. Well, if we got muddy or something, we couldn't go to bed that way. We had to wash our feet anyway. But baths weren't a daily thing like they are now. You washed up, as best you could, but to sit in the tub, that was Saturday night.
Right.
Now we practically wash our skin off.
Right. Well, thank you for drawing a picture of your farm for us.
Well, I hope it's as I remember it.